So it's not someone going out there and physically digging for it.
No, I mean, we're living in the data age now. Don't be so archaic.
Oh, forgive me. Welcome to the Gunners Club on a day where we have a public holiday for a fucking horse race.
And what could be better than that? And I've just filled my glass because, after all, a man is not a beer camel.
A beer camel. Is that one hump or two?
Well, depends what sort of mood I'm in. So a little while ago, something really interesting happened. It's something which could probably change the economy, the way we think about money, and the way we think about government forever. A white paper came out by a person. We don't really even know if that person exists. We don't know if it's a man, if it's a woman, if it's a team of people, or even what country they're from. But the nom de plume, their pen name, was Satoshi Nakamoto. Great name to say. And of course, if you don't know the name, you know the currency. And of course, I'm talking about Bitcoin.
Okay. Now,
the first Bitcoin, what they call a Genesis block, was mined as far back as 2009. That basically kick-started it. You see... Mined, so it's all done through processes of your computer. Unlocks algorithms, and effectively it releases that currency.
So it's not someone going out there and physically digging for it.
No, I mean, we're living in the data age now. Don't be so archaic.
Oh, forgive me.
So effectively, a number of questions were raised. Does this mean that there's a fundamental change to the way that people think about money? I mean, this is something which basically is encrypted and it sits on people's ledgers. You see, if you purchase something with your Visa or your MasterCard, what happens is Visa or MasterCard, they look to your credit to see if you've got it. They record the money that you've just spent on their ledger, and they make sure that you don't spend that money twice. But Bitcoin works so that everybody who uses it gives up a portion of the processing power of their computer. And it's not centrally stored, it's diffused. Everyone keeps a record of what happens. And that effectively is what they call blockchaining. It means you can trace the history of one Bitcoin from the time it was born, right the way through to every transaction which it occurs with it. Now, a chap called Laszlo, back in 2010, made the first transaction of note. So for 10,000 Bitcoin, he purchased a couple of pizzas. That's the equivalent of about $520 million Australian per pizza. Back in 2010, maybe he bought a Diet Coke as well, maybe hired a couple of DVDs. It's what I would call the first real big night in.
But, okay, so how much was the Bitcoin worth? I mean, that's what it's worth in today's money.
Yeah, back then it was worth about 3 cents Australian.
Per Bitcoin?
Per Bitcoin. So you see with money...
Did you hear that physical thump of my jaw dropping?
The jaw dropped.
Yeah. Wow, okay.
So scarcity and belief in the value of something, which is all important for money. So we talk about the ingenuity of humans. So about 12,000 years ago, we started to do this pesky thing called agriculture. And it meant that we had something which was durable. Let's say, for example, grains. We could store it. And if we stored it, we'd get a chit saying that you've got X amount of grain in the central repository. And that would be basically an engraving on a shell. The engraving on the shell was worth nothing. But essentially think of that as a coin. Okay. You had a coin, you had a token of money.
It stood for something.
It stood for something. So credit, remember, it comes from a word for credence. You have to believe in it, give it credence. And that's what credit is. Any of you who are coin collectors know about numismism, which is basically the coins. And that basically comes from the Greek words to believe and the law. And it keeps going to that. If you believe in the currency probably exists.
Okay.
Now, a couple of things happened a couple of centuries ago which completely turned our economy and our understanding of money on its head. And I'm going to lead this through to how our understanding of Bitcoin is changing the way that we think of things, and AI as well. So stay with me for a couple of minutes. The Industrial Revolution happened around 1760 in England. What it meant is that we had steam power. It meant we had to have people leave the land and effectively unlock the power of that. But a few other important things happened. In around actually exactly 1600, the Brits formed the East India Company.
Yes.
Now, the idea of that was basically to unlock wealth in South Asia. In fact, they unlocked wealth instead mostly in India and China. But they followed, first of all, the Portuguese and the Spanish in having navies that could ply the seas, go from country to country. And then the Brits and the Dutch came on board with that as well. You see, the idea of trade is arbitrage. You buy something for one price and you sell it, well, for a higher price.
Well, of course.
Hopefully. But you see, the fact that they could actually master distance with their boats meant that they could conduct that arbitrage all the way through the route. So, for example, in the UK, you could produce wool. You could sell that wool in China, but actually trade it for silk in Shanghai.
Ah, yes.
And from Shanghai, you could take that silk and take it to Yokohama in Japan and get swords. And with those swords, you could go to Bombay, India, and exchange it for spice. And we know how valuable spice was, particularly rare spices and teas and things like that in England.
Yep.
But it made a huge difference to the way that people and accountants, put my hand up, sorry,
Yeah.
and entrepreneurs thought about money. You see, to create this wealth, to create large-scale farming, and even to continue on with capital for the Industrial Revolution, you needed credit.
Yep.
And credit had to be repaid. Now, in the past, this is the way that wealth was created. People say that if you had a 1,000-page book on the history of the Roman Empire, the first 900 pages of it would be on family farming. That's pretty true, because
Okay.
it was the family that created value, and there was usually just a very little surplus that was left over. But suddenly, when we're going to this idea of entrepreneurship, capitalism, the need for capital and then for credit so that we can produce these sheep, you need amounts of money. If you need amounts of money, you have to pay the cost of money, which we call interest.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay. Changes the way we think of things, because before it was the family would produce whatever was left over. They might be able to exchange it for something that they needed, a knife or something like that. Mm-hmm. The economic model instead changed to, this is the cost of capital. If this is your plan, this is what your profit has to be to cover it.
Yes.
So we suddenly changed society's thought to profit at all costs and the profit motive. It's a fundamental difference in the way that we think of things. I remember the ideas of the 1950s Americana, which we see in ads and old films, where capitalism promised wealth for all. Instead, what happened really is just before that, women were thrown in to participate in the workforce to help with the Second World War. And then, of course, the economic imperative of paying for the cost of money meant that it was a demand that both partners in a marriage had to work. It wasn't the dream that we were actually sold. I think that we were sold a pub.
Well, the dream that everybody can get wealthy out of that concept, I believe still holds true, in as much as they're taking a cohort of people that have shown that it can work, and if we enlarge that to incorporate all people, you would expect that if everybody puts in the same effort that that cohort did to make their wealth and be profitable, so can everyone else.
Yeah, but if you've got more people squabbling over the same property, essentially the price of the property goes up. Now, occasionally, you're probably tempted to look online at what your property is worth, and you might feel rich from time to time. Look how much my property's gone up. Have a think about it the other way. Look how much the purchasing power of your dollar has gone down.
Yes.
It's rather a sad way
Yeah.
to look at things. Now, Karl Marx, when he wrote Das Kapital, and that was, in the mid-1800s, he was really talking about, to some extent, England, because he had lived in England for the time, and he looked at the Industrial Revolution, and remembered that labourers, basically, their wealth was their labour.
Yep.
And Marx would basically say, well, everything is basically the price of labour. Land is the price of labour as well. It takes a bit of torturous thinking to sort of come online with the way he's thinking. But think about this. When it was discovered that you could actually sell your sheep to the markets in Shanghai, then suddenly the price of land increased. The price of land was worth what it would cost for the capital, for your business plan, basically, to rear those sheep and have that business plan to send it off. Overnight, this is what happened. they fenced off most of the estates in England, and people used to be serfs mostly in that time. It was a very small, concentrated people who were the landowners. 70% of serfs were kicked off their property basically overnight, became basically destitute, and were looking for work in what Blake would describe as those dark satanic mills. We took them to the dark satanic mills. Now, recently I've been doing a number of classes in AI, and the problem is not that I can't get a straight answer from a lecturer. I can't get a straight answer that agrees with the other straight answer or that agrees with my gut. Now, the promise is that we'll have untold wealth. The promise is that we will not see much in the way of jobs being taken. The promise is that if you've got 20 functions in your job, maybe the middle 7 will be taken. You'll be edified, you'll be elevated, you'll be deified, you'll be able to look over the work that's been done, roboticized for you. Now, I understand that we're expecting by 2040 for 1 billion, that's with a B, automated AI-powered robots to come onto the workforce. Now, if that's not a spectre of fear, I really don't know what is. Remember, we're told, your job will be made easier, your job will be augmented. If you're on a call, for example, there'll be prompts which come in, which will give you shortcuts to suggest how to terminate the call quickly and to have a good resolution. Well, having 1,000 million robots working alongside you, looking over your decrepit, weak human body, is a little bit scary for me. So how do we get around this? How do we have a look at this idea of, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, us living this dream that we expected, that we were promised in the 50s, that we wouldn't have to labour the way that we are now, where in fact we've got both yourself and your spouse out there working at the moment. Remember, that didn't happen. Now, the Luddites, you may have heard of them. They were the people who took off their shoes and jammed them in the cogs of the industrial machines.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, but in fact, it wasn't that they were angry at the machines. They were angry at the fact that they didn't own the machines. It's like you wouldn't be angry at the idea if there was a vending machine instead of a cafe if you owned that vending machine.
Well, that's
that
right.
was selling that Coca-Cola to somebody.
But it took capital to buy those vending machines.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. That makes sense.
I mean, you're thinking of a very Anglo-Saxon economic model. A more Germanic French model would be that you'd expect to have workers, for example, on the board of a company.
Mm-hmm.
You'd expect much more union participation. We've got a very Anglophile sense of the way things should work. Now, a Greek economist, he rejoices in the name of Yanis Varoufakis.
How do you spell that?
Well, I could spell it for you, but look it up online. His suggestion was this, but mind you, he's derided to some extent in Greece, but I like some of his ideas. If the workers had partial ownership of the machines that will augment them, that will assist them, that, let's face it, will eventually replace them, then there is a passive income coming through. That's important because as the economy continues to produce, we expect it to produce more. If it doesn't produce more, there's no economic growth. If there's no economic growth, there's no increase in wealth. There's a big problem with that. And Henry Ford knew about this, and one of the reasons why he provided good wages to his workers and people wanted to work for Ford, he paid them enough so that they in turn could buy their own Model T.
Ha!
Yeah, he understood.
That's clever.
He understood if
That's
you
very
pay
clever.
people enough to participate in purchasing the products,
Yeah.
the economy will continue.
That's very clever.
It is quite clever. But you see, if people are out of a job, they're not earning. If people are not earning, they're not spending.
Correct.
People are not spending, the wheels of economy are not turning. And that's an end not just to the wheels of the economy, but essentially to us. But if there's that passive income coming in, if they're participating by owning some of the robots and the AI, the economy can continue. It can continue even to grow, effectively, as wealth continues to grow. And hopefully through solar and nuclear energy becomes cheaper. Back to Bitcoin. And this is where one of the major problems come in. Bitcoin is regulated to a set amount of coins. From memory, it's 23 million. And we're expecting by about 2032, from memory.
So hang on, who's
that will be
regulating
it.
that?
Well, this was all in the white paper that you should have read. So there is an end game. There is an end game to it, and that's the total amount which can be generated. Now, central banks can create money. They create money all the time. They do it by what's called a bond, and they issue the bonds, and banks love them because banks think of them as basically the most liquid asset that they can sell as a government bond.
Yeah, but that's also how it devalues, by continuously creating it out of thin air.
Yeah. The problem is, though, you look at, say, the 1930s with the recession, it was important to regrow the economy. And you do that by a number of ways. You ease lending, you ease lending restrictions, and you also create more jobs and you create more money as well for that. Now, Bitcoin's major problem is you cannot extend the amount of Bitcoins. Not only that, because it's deregulated, there's not central government authorities. Not only that, there's not central banks. We call ours the Reserve Bank, but they don't actually have any reserves. That's a bit of a misnomer, that thing. These final solutions, I hate to use that term, for the economy, the triggers that the government just can't use. They can't create more money. They can't be the lender of last resort to the banks if everyone's depending solely upon a decentralised system. So how do I see that? Remember, we talked about the way that we've been so clever. We've created trade, then we created the profit principle, profit first, and then we created ways of exchanging money. We put our belief behind it. That's how it worked. We've gone through Karl Marx's Industrial Revolution, and then we're talking about how can we generate wealth for people? You know, the concept of a universal income. I like the idea of people having a passive income through robots and through capital goods, but the idea of decentralizing this completely and handing it off to something like a Bitcoin, I think it's a fantasy.
Unless it works.
Love to know what you think. And thank you for joining us. There's plenty of episodes that we've got that might appeal to you. Some on the economy, some are politically related, and some even where we talk about booze.
Or even music, for that matter. Social issues aplenty.
Aplenty. We'll see you soon.
Catch you on the next one, guys, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Give us a comment down below. Let us know what you reckon.